Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, food suppliers and food banks have questioned whether they would be responsible for securing basic supplies for vulnerable people if a no-deal Brexit led to food shortages. Well, earlier this month, the Food and Rural Affairs Minister, govt, said his department was not responsible for the supply of food and drink to the population in an emergency, adding that food suppliers should respond to any disruptions themselves. So, in a no-deal Brexit, who is responsible for feeding those most in need? Kieran Jenkins reports.
The risk is spelled out in the government's own Yellowhammer document. In a no-deal Brexit, food prices could rise. Those on the lowest incomes will be disproportionately affected.
So, yeah, sort of things like tinned meals and hygiene products.
Glasgow's Drumchapel Food Bank is already under strain.
Like in case there was a no-deal Brexit or something like that, could you speak?
No, not at the moment, no.
If demand goes up, whose job is it to step in?
I definitely think with food prices, food shortages, and just sort of trying to get around everyone, there is going to be a huge issue, I think, for sure.
So you expect potentially more people needing to come here?
Yeah, more people needing to use the service, maybe more frequently as well, I would say.
So who's going to provide the extra supplies that are needed?
I mean, that's what we're worried about.
If anything like the scenario in the government's own Yellowhammer document comes to pass, then who is ultimately responsible for feeding those people most in need? Well, the UK government said earlier this month it is not responsible for food supply in the event of an emergency. The expertise, it said, lies within the food industry. Well, today, some major figures from the food industry and those who help feed those most vulnerable are speaking out.
In an open letter, they call on the UK government to stop passing the buck, saying they were dismayed when the government said it had no legal responsibility to help vulnerable people get the food they need in the event of a no-deal Brexit. They're demanding the UK government immediately make available hardship funds so vulnerable people can get the food they need. The letter is signed by FareShare, a huge charity that redirects surplus food, by the Food and Farming Alliance, Sustain, by the Federation of Wholesale Distributors, whose members serve almost 500,000 UK businesses, and by the Provision Trade Federation of dairy and meat companies, whose members include industry giants like Arla and Danone. Its Director General told us today they've not had contingency discussions with the government.
If the government does believe that there are serious risks of those sorts of shortages, one would, I think, expect government to have contingency plans in place. They wouldn't necessarily want to share them too widely, but we would hope that those plans are there, and I would have hoped that by now we might have been more closely drawn in to those kinds of discussions.
DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, said it is meeting regularly with industry to make sure they're prepared for leaving the EU. And that the food industry is well versed in dealing with scenarios that can impact food supply. From his farm in Knutsford, Ed Salt supplies dairy products across the UK and has concerns.
It was an element of surprise when we saw that and heard that DEFRA had made a statement early in September that they were pushing the responsibility of any potential food shortages back to the supply base. In reality, it's not scaremongering. You know, when you look into the detail, you know, government has said that there won't be shortages of food, and in reality, there probably won't be a shortage of food, but there may well be a shortage of foodstuffs, and that shortage will only push prices up.
Unlike in England, the governments in Scotland and Wales have put money aside for those who may struggle with food costs in a no deal. But they suggest they're not legally responsible for emergency food supplies either.
So who really should take the responsibility?
Well, the government, yeah. It's their idea, so to push through for a no deal, so really they should be prepared for all of the implications that come with that.
The government's advice is to prepare for Brexit. But some of those who feed the most vulnerable fear the government's own preparations are falling short.
Kieran Jenkins reporting.